There is no strife, no prejudice, no national conflict in outer space as yet. Space can be explored and mastered without feeding the fires of war, without repeating the mistakes that man has made in extending his grip around this globe of ours. For the eyes of the world now look into space, to the moon, and to the planets beyond.
Penguin Random House Audio presents A Woman I Know, Female Spies, Double Identities, and a new story of the Kennedy assassination. This is the author, Mary Haverstick. Publisher's note. This audiobook refers to a PDF file comprised of images from the print edition of this book. Please download this PDF from your digital retailer to access these images. For Bill and Mary, my guiding lights. Prelude. When I first met her, I still believed in astronauts and heroes, in shiny planes and glistening rockets, and in America and her freedoms. I was there to tell her story, an American story, but it was also a feminist story, that a woman could perform better than a man even in his own game. In that respect, it's true. She never let me down. There was always something clandestine and dark about our meetings. Never was bread broken as friends, not even a pot of tea or the offer of a glass of water. Instead, with shades drawn in a tiny living room, hushed tones were used to speak of when America was in a Cold War and a space race, and how this slim blonde woman had come to know almost every major figure in America's quest for domination. Jerrie Cobb is humble, and she'd even tell you that directly in case you missed it. She didn't like publicity in spite of having appeared on the big 3 TV networks and in almost every Time Life publication. A portrait of dualities may have been there from moment one, but how often do we look beyond the first refracted light? The stronger image in a double exposure always catches our eye, and our mind makes sense of it, organizing it into something we recognize, into something distinctly human, into something very much like ourselves. I suppose I always wanted to be an astronaut, a modern-day explorer, bravely hurtling into the great unknown. At its essence, this is also filmmaking. You approach a story that you're intensely drawn to for reasons which you're never quite sure, but you fling yourself into a multiple-year obsession, and only when you're done do you begin to understand what the story was all about. You just take the leap and know the rest will come. Myrtle. I was in a narrow art gallery at dusk when I spotted a frail woman dancing with a cane to piped-in music, and I just had to cast her in my next feature film. I had a lovely dance number planned where, in one woman's imagination, strangers waiting for a medical test break into a dance, and I could now never see the scene again without Myrtle Cagle in it. It turns out Myrtle had early dementia, but her bright light was still shining from within, and her daughter agreed that Myrtle would love to be in a film. In fact, they both volunteered. As we left the gallery that evening, the daughter handed me a book, The Mercury 13 by Martha Ackman. She said they'd brought it to give to Myrtle's doctor, who they'd seen earlier that day, but he hadn't deserved the gift. It told the story of 13 female pilots who took NASA's astronaut tests in 1960 and shocked the world by passing. By tearing down gender barriers at NASA, at a time when only men and chimpanzees need a plight, they'd paved the way for Sally Ride. Myrtle was one of them, one of America's first female astronaut candidates. Perhaps I should consider this story as a film, they suggested. Filmmakers are approached with story ideas nonstop. I always tell people to champion their own story, that no one will take their idea forward with the gusto they will. But this was different. This was an astronaut story. At 9 years old, I'd even written my own little letter to NASA asking how I could become an astronaut, and I was told I couldn't, because girls couldn't test jets. Neither could grown women. It's never a good idea to send a 9-year-old a rejection letter. Martha Ackman's meticulously researched book stepped through every detail of the star-crossed episode. Through her comprehensive work, you could glimpse the dreams of the 13 women who must have, for one brief moment, allowed the fleeting thought that they had a chance to walk shoulder to shoulder with the men, a chance to imagine a world that recognized them as equals, a chance to brave the stars. As I studied the Mercury 13, I found out there were numerous books and documentaries on the subject, but none had pierced the public consciousness. Whenever I mentioned that there had been a secret women's astronaut program, the response was universal. It would make an incredible film. How had Hollywood missed it? Well, their loss was my gain. I was now committed to making this movie happen. It was clear, looking at the dramatic arc from a film perspective, that one woman was essential to the story. Yet this key protagonist hadn't participated much with the other books and documentaries to date. She was vital to the narrative because she'd taken the astronaut tests before the other women, and after passing, organized the opportunity for the other 12. When NASA canceled the program, she was the one who demanded and received a congressional hearing where for 2 days the idea of allowing women astronauts was debated. It was under the Klieg lights in this high-octane forum that she made her deeply personal plea for inclusion. The world wasn't ready for her, and she was not only defeated, she was publicly humiliated in the process. During the testimony against her, she sat silently while John Glenn, with half her piloting hours, proclaimed there were no women qualified to become astronauts. He said that knowing she'd just passed the very same tests he did. My mother could probably pass the physical exam that they give preseason for the Redskins, but I doubt if she could play too many games for them, was a typical Glenn one-liner that had the assembly laughing in her face. The proceeding ended with Congressman crowding Glenn for his autograph. Her dream of space was dashed, and she soon left the modern world behind to devote her life to serving the indigenous people of the Amazon jungle, delivering medicine and supplies by air. She was recognized for this work with a Nobel Peace Prize nomination in 1981. When I first reached out to her by email, she was in her mid-70s and still flying the Amazon skies every day. I was told by the woman managing her affairs that a message could be relayed, but not to hold my breath. She would be a hard person to reach, but reach her I must. I just had to meet this Jerrie Cobb. Jerrie. My first sighting of Jerrie was appropriately at an airport. My patience had paid off, and a full year after my initial outreach, she agreed to meet me about the possibility of telling her story for a film. We met for a brisk lunch at the Baltimore-Washington airport as she arrived for the NASA 50th anniversary gala. John Glenn would also be there, but old tensions had eased and their relationship had come full circle. Still, there was a twinkle in her eye when she told me she asked Glenn why she shouldn't have gotten the geriatric shuttle seat instead of him, since she never had her first chance. The defeat still stung, but Jerrie was careful not to appear bitter, and I didn't get the impression she was. As I greeted her in the Skyway, I offered to get her luggage, but all she'd brought on the trip was a canvas tote, the size of those given out free with a subscription to the New Yorker. She was wearing old lady jeans, walking sneakers, and a denim shirt. The NASA 50th was to be a black tie event. I figured she had a plan that extended beyond the tiny bag, but I decided not to ask. Jerrie was nice, but not necessarily warm, as we ordered fries, a grilled cheese, and a Coke at the airport lounge. Actually, I ordered that. Jerrie didn't seem to eat much, at least not when I was around. I stated my case, that I was drawn to her story, but I'd never done someone's true story on film before, and I wasn't here to talk her into it. I felt strongly I was the one to do it, but the feeling had to be mutual or I would walk away. It was an interesting negotiation from the start, and one I sensed was fraught for her because there were a few tense moments. Why, I wasn't sure. Jerrie had some stipulations if we were to tell her story. From her perspective, the other 12 women had participated at a much lower level than she had. She'd been the first to ace the physical exams and then had gone on to tackle
Sample complete. Ready to continue?